Coming up, Tzu Chi's disaster relief and medical team in Nepal continues to deliver aid and supplies to quake survivors. We learn how Nepalese design their homes so they may better withstand earthquakes. Welcome to DaAi Headlines. I'm Dennis Wu. Thank you for joining us. Recently in Nepal, Tzu Chi's disaster relief and medical team decided to hold a small-scale aid distribution event at the Grand Hotel, which is where the team is staying, for the some 70 staff members who were also affected by the recent quake. But first, we take a look at Tzu Chi gifted to Likao Hospital with 100 Tzu Chi folding beds and 500 eco-friendly blankets to meet the demands of the recent influx of patients.
The lobby of this hospital has been turned into a medical ward.
There are simply not enough beds to meet the number of patients. Besides the normal hospital beds, many of them are beds borrowed from a nearby school's dormitories.
It is not hard to imagine how lacking medical resources are here when dormitory beds are being used as hospital beds.
This hospital is this area's main medical facility. With the increase of patients lately, they don't have enough beds for everyone coming in.
Tzu Chi volunteers deliver some folding beds and eco-friendly blankets to help. This portable folding bed is easy to carry, and when set up, it becomes a sturdy bed.
Pulling up the middle, it becomes 2 seats. It's ventilated and not as hard as metal.
The multi-purpose folding bed can also be used in waiting rooms as a chair.
There's nothing, they are now sleeping on the floor. So if we can provide those beds to them, then it will be better for them.
Understanding the needs of the survivors, the Tzu Chi medical team works to help Nepal in any way they can. Meanwhile, Chef Nepal has been busy in the kitchen, making vegetarian meals for the group of Tzu Chi volunteers that has been staying at his hotel. Nepal's home was also destroyed in the quakes.
When the second earthquake hit Nepal, I was working at the hotel. My house was damaged. The entire building collapsed.
Nepal is not alone. There are over 70 employees who are quake survivors like him.
The hotel staff and us get along well. Even though they see us coming and going with relief supplies, they don't take them. They told us that they are suffering at home and asked if we can help them.
Despite being tired from heading to Nepal's remote villages and tent communities during the day, the Tzu Chi disaster relief and medical team decided to show the hotel staff that their care extends to them as well. Changing out of his chef's apron this evening, Nepal is a guest of Tzu Chi.
I don't feel any difference between the poor and the rich. I feel very comfortable joining this event.
Actually, Tzu Chi volunteers were the first guests to stay at the hotel following the earthquake.
What you do, which I see from morning till evening. I see you guys going early in the morning, coming very late, and you're not going for a fancy food. You are, you're sticking to the good, your own food.
Forming friendships wherever they go, Tzu Chi volunteers hope to bring back smiles to the faces of survivors everywhere.
Apart from carrying out distributions and conducting free clinics in Nepal, Tzu Chi's disaster relief and medical team also took time to visit one of the 4 Great Love villages the Tzu Chi Foundation had constructed in Makwanpur back in 1995 in the aftermath of a devastating flood.
Tzu Chi volunteers embark on a journey filled with anticipation. The affinity between Tzu Chi and these places arose from a flood some 20 years ago. Situated southeast of Kathmandu, Tzu Chi's Great Love village lies in Padam Pokhari, Makwanpur district. Local residents greeted volunteers with warm and welcoming smiles.
Taiwan? Yes.
Tzu Chi's assistance to residents in the aftermath of a flood 2 decades ago still rings fresh in the minds of some of the elderly. Extending a very warm welcome to her visitors, Sito Devi invited the volunteers to her home.
玻璃震破了，哇，人安全哦，平安哦。Namaste.
With only small cracks in the walls, these houses erected by Tzu Chi 20 years ago withstood 2 recent strong quakes without suffering any structural damage.
根据大爱村村民表示，这一块启用的纪念碑在4年前曾经
According to residents here, this inaugural plaque was severely damaged 4 years ago. At the time, residents pitched in money to have the memorial plaque repaired. Although the plaque has not been pieced together perfectly, it, however, contains the love and sincerity of the villagers.
每一个字都有着村民的愤愤心意。
From an aerial view, one can see the entire layout of the Great Lap village. The village encompasses 400 duplex houses, each with its own yard. Now, 20 years later, approximately 2,500 to 3,000 people live in the village.
Parallel to the direction of wave velocity.
Prabhakar Basnet and his family of 5 live inside this 36-square-meter house, and his bed is also where he studies. The walls, a vibrant pink, have been painted by his sister.
Why you choose the pink color?
My best color is pink.
So you color your house so beautiful.
Thank you.
Namaste. Namaste. Namaste.
In 1993, Nepal was battered by heavy rains that triggered devastating floods. To house those who lost their homes, Tzu Chi constructed homes which were handed over to flood survivors by 1995. Although the floods occurred in Nepal, the effects were felt by Tzu Chi volunteers in Taiwan. Now, 20 years later, Tzu Chi volunteers have set foot in Nepal once again, helping quake survivors through their darkest hours.
The Great Love villages that Tzu Chi built back then was in response to a devastating flood that displaced some 400,000 people back in 1993. After providing immediate assistance, the foundation realized that most survivors were in need of a proper shelter. With the approval of the Nepalese government, 1,800 homes were built. Master Tzu Yan dispatched a relief team to Nepal's Kathmandu. Conquering many obstacles, we finally arrived at the disaster site.
Tzu Chi volunteer Wu Tianfu recalls how floods triggered by heavy rain had caused widespread destruction in Nepal back in 1993. Thousands of people lost their lives and some 400,000 residents were displaced. In September of that same year, at the request of the Mongolian and Tibetan Affairs Commission, Tzu Chi volunteers set foot in Nepal and joined forces with the government to assist flood survivors.
The Nepalese government provided the land and we outsourced construction companies to build the houses. It was a historical event for us. I remember during that time there were months of traveling back and forth to kickstart the process.
Tzu Chi volunteer Wu Tianfu was among the international relief team that set out for Nepal. After an agreement was signed with the Nepalese government at the end of 1993, 1,800 houses were erected in 4 villages across 3 districts in just 16 months.
For the Nepalese government, it was also a rather significant event because there had never been a charity organization that had stepped up to fulfill their needs and carried out their promises.
Although these residents have forgotten the faces of the Tzu Chi volunteers, they will forever remember the love and compassion of the blue and white clad angels who provided them with a safe shelter and a chance to start life anew.
Many of the collapsed houses in Nepal were in fact built with traditional Nepalese earthquake-proofing techniques. However, the traditional architecture was no match for the ferocity of the recent quakes. Nonetheless, let's learn more about Nepalese architecture.
这一栋是比较属于钢筋混凝土的建筑物。
The houses in Nepal's Bhaktapar city are built with either red bricks or cement and steel. Following the recent earthquakes, most of the old red brick houses had collapsed.
其实他们可能对于砖造来。
They use traditional techniques to build these brick houses. Look at the walls. You notice there are holes into which they inserted wooden rods at an angle to reinforce the infrastructure when an earthquake strikes.
These traditional earthquake-proof techniques might work with minor tremors. However, the houses still crumbled when the massive quake hit.
如果是在临小巷子的，因为在巷子的地方。
In a small alley with no neighboring houses, a building has nothing to lean on, so they designed stones that support wooden poles that prop up against the building's walls and give it support.
挡类似这个叫做挡住。
Many of the houses that collapsed had poor structural integrity or other structural problems.
这个砖缝之间。
In Taiwan, cement is used to bond bricks, but here they only use soil and traditional bonding techniques.
Since houses built with traditional techniques are unable to withstand powerful earthquakes, the Nepalese have begun to use cement and steel to build their homes as they learn to better safeguard their lives.
As we reported earlier, the tent community in Bhaktapur, Nepal, that shelters displaced quake survivors had a problem with access to fresh water, greatly hampering the quality of life of the community's residents. Thankfully, city volunteers noticed the problem and recently delivered a water tank that can hold 10 tons of water.
In a tent community that shelters displaced quake victims in Bhaktapur, Nepal, there is now direct access to water thanks to the addition of a huge water tank.
Before, our needs couldn't be met because there was no water here. Now with the water tank here, at least we can wash our hands. Before, we couldn't even flush toilets. Before, we barely had enough water for drinking. Now, at least we can wash our hands and face, and even wipe ourselves down. Still, we can't take a shower or do laundry here. The water tank that was here could only hold 1 ton of water, and the government dispatched water trucks here 3 times a day. Our tank is 10 tons in capacity, which should be able to provide them with 3 days' worth of water.
At first, residents had to conserve water even when cooking. Now they don't have to worry as much. The tank is here thanks to the Tzu Chi volunteers.
I noticed one of the restrooms was locked up, so I asked the commander in charge. He told me the government had to lock it up because it was simply too filthy inside.
Now with running water, residents here are finding some sense of relief, and many hope that things are indeed getting better.
The team leader for the 4th Tzu Chi team in Nepal is Hualien Tzu Chi Hospital Deputy Superintendent Wang Zhihong, who is also a Tzu Chi volunteer. A seasoned veteran in disaster relief, Dr. Wang takes on many roles in the free clinics. Let's take a look at his dedication.
Warmly embracing 3 children, Hualien Tzu Chi Hospital's Deputy Superintendent Wang Zhihong plays many roles at the free clinic in Chitapur, Nepal.
As a Tzu Chi, I can take on any task, pharmacist, doctor, or nurse. Many of the older generation of doctors are able to take on different roles when needed.
Taking care of a child's injury, Dr. Wang also comforts the child as a father would. At the next workstation, he double-checks the medication being given. Dr. Wang also brings with him the work ethic of a Tzu Chi volunteer and treats each patient like family.
I think their spirits still need to be looked after, as I heard that survivors who had returned to their homes to sleep later went back to the tent communities once more. This means that they are still unsettled in their hearts and scared about the future.
After the free clinic is over, Dr. Wang leads the children in picking up the trash around the venue. By doing so, Dr. Wang is telling the children that protecting the environment is an important part of living a happy and healthy life.
Due to even terrain of southwestern Taiwan, the area is very suitable for farming and is therefore the country's breadbasket. With the support of vast and complex irrigation networks, farmers here can access all the water they need to grow rice and other produce. Unfortunately, it is also due to these irrigation channels that all the fields are now at risk from industrial waste pollution. The problem is especially bad in Taichung and Changhua. Here is our report.
In central Taiwan, farmers are heartbroken seeing how their fields have been polluted.
We used whatever water we could find and have to flood our fields. But it turned out we are surrounded by heavy metal pollution. So we discovered cadmium and copper in the rice that was harvested and could only send it to the incinerators.
Carried by wastewater, heavy metals continue to accumulate in these farms. Besides Taichung, Hebei of Changhua is also a hot zone for industrial pollution.
When the EPA was conducting a general inspection of wastewater produced by the electroplating industry, heavy metals were found in this field and this one.
Actually, so many fields here have been polluted by heavy metals that even local environmental activists can't keep track completely, and the culprits are none other than the electroplating factories surrounding the area. Though the one nearby has been ordered to shut down, the wastewater it discharged through hidden pipelines and underground wells has already ruined over 200 hectares of farmland here.
All
the wastewater is discharged illegally. The EPA has barely scratched the surface of the problem. The fields here get their water from the second east-west channel. But see how the factories are right next to the fields? These are their drainage pipes.
So the factories continue to operate while farmers continue to farm. And just exactly where does the water used for irrigation come from? The salt farmer had to walk past several factories to turn on his pump, which then draws the water discharged by the factories and pumps it right into his field. This is what typically happens here in northern Changhua.
Actually, this problem has long been ongoing in Changhua. Industrial wastewater contaminating the fields. In the whole Changhua area, we estimate that the area susceptible to pollution, i.e. the area that we need to inspect, is about 2,000 hectares.
The main source of pollution in northern Changhua is wastewater from the electroplating industry. This means all farms that rely on the irrigation network composed of the second and third east-west channels and their tributaries are vulnerable. Nickel, chromium, copper and zinc are the four metals that inspectors are targeting.
This is where the irrigation channel is, so we will search for its entry point into this field. See this pipe? That's where the water is coming from. When we take samples, we will draw water within 1 meter radius of the water entry point, because that's where heavy metals typically accumulate and thus should have the highest concentration.
EPA contracted inspectors to conduct inspections by searching for a field's water entry point. I have now confirmed the water entry point is here. When inserted into the ground, this device will collect ground samples about 15 centimeters below the surface.
In the next 2 years, we plan to tackle all high-risk areas in all of Changhua, so the area of contaminated fields will likely increase.
Though conducting such a large-scale inspection is costly and time-consuming, the EPA will continue to carry out its task and shut down violators as they are discovered. To date, the agency has successfully shut down 19 factories, while 31 others have been prosecuted. As for the Council of Agriculture, it will also begin to enforce the Water Protection Act and plans to ban all discharge of industrial wastewater in the area in 6 years. Hopefully, this will give the environment some breathing room.
Moving on to South Africa, Recently, Tzu Chi volunteers from Durban visited Swaziland to conduct a volunteer training seminar to help local volunteers better understand Tzu Chi's ideals and missions. As soon as Tzu Chi volunteers from Durban, South Africa exit the call, they are surrounded by children. As local Swazi volunteers have long provided hot meals to the needy in this area, Tzu Chi's blue and white uniform has become quite a familiar presence. The main purpose of their South African counterparts' visit is to hold a training seminar for local volunteers.
And the third bar with a sign.
Learning from the Sutra of innumerable meanings as well as Buddhist etiquette, local volunteers are changing their lives for the better.
Every members of Tzu Chi was totally transformed, their faith and lives by our master training.
With their hearts full of Tzu Chi spirit, local volunteers are ready to walk the Tzu Chi path. Back to Taiwan for Tzu Chi's Buddha Day ceremonies in Penghu, which were attended by the charity's care recipients and residents of Xixi village, who remain devastated by last year's Trans-Asia air crash. Tzu Chi volunteers hope the villagers could bathe in the Buddha's grace and find peace of mind.
In July of last year, a Trans-Asia Airways flight crashed into houses in Xixi village, Huxi Township. 10 months later, the destroyed houses have not been rebuilt and the villagers have not recovered from the trauma.
I do not worry about this. I come here when I need to, but some villagers avoid coming here. For nearly a year, Tzu Chi volunteers have cared for Xixi village's residents. In May, they also invited the villagers to join the Buddha Day ceremony to pay respect to the Buddha.
In the past, the villagers did not like to come out in the evenings. We hope to invite them to worship the Buddha in the evenings and not be afraid anymore.
Besides holding the Buddha Day celebration at the activity center, the volunteers also brought the Buddha statue to the homes of seniors so that they could also experience the grace of the Buddha.
We're grateful that you came to hold the Buddha Day ceremony and bring them peace of mind. It is very helpful.
The volunteers also held the Buddha Day ceremony for care recipients at the Jingsi Hall in Ma Gong. Uncle Wu, who lives alone, looks forward to seeing the volunteers.
I'm usually by myself at home. I'm glad to come and see everyone here.
Thanks to the volunteers, the care recipients not only receive rice and monetary aid, but they were also able to bathe in the Buddha's grace and pray for their own well-being.
At the end of today's program, we join the second graders at Tzu Chi Kindergarten in Bayan Lepas, Malaysia, as they hit the supermarket to shop for ingredients for making a vegetarian meal. That's all the time we have for. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.